Millionaire sees his maid's black son digging in the trash, and at first he can't believe his eyes. In the shadow of his mansion's marble walls and glittering chandeliers, a child is scavenging for scraps as if survival itself depended on it. To the millionaire, it seems like mischief, maybe rebellion, something embarrassing that must be hidden before neighbors notice. But when he learns the heartbreaking truth behind that desperate act, his world tilts. The reality he had built his fortune on, that hard work alone determines worth, collapses, leaving him devastated. What he discovers will forever change the way he sees privilege, justice, and the quiet struggles unfolding at the edges of his polished life. He had constructed a routine engineered to keep chaos out. Drivers arrived before dawn, gardeners trimmed hedges into obedient lines, housekeepers moved like clockwork through echoing halls. Success had taught him to confuse silence with peace. It was a house that swallowed sound, mergers negotiated behind closed doors, deals completed with a fingertips signature, a daughter practicing scales in a music room that felt like a cathedral to discipline. He convinced himself that order was the same as goodness, that a well-run life must be a well-lived one. The maid had worked here for years, a presence as constant as the fireplace mantle or the scent of lemon polish. He knew the outline of her story the way people know wallpaper, there but not quite seen. She arrived early, left late, and never asked for more than the schedule. Sometimes he caught the flicker of her boy waiting in the service corridor after school, backpack sagging, eyes watchful. The child kept to the edges, as if he had learned early that edges are safer than centers when rooms belong to others. That afternoon, a restless unease sent the millionaire walking the long way around the property. His thoughts were all numbers and charts and a presentation that refused to resolve. He wanted air, the kind that isn't conditioned and perfumed. He cut behind the garage toward the alley where the bins waited for Friday collection. He was thinking of his speech, the one about merit, efficiency, opportunity, when motion snagged his attention. A small figure lifted the lid of a trash container and stood on tiptoe, fishing for something with delicate care. The boy's shoulders were set in a shape he recognized from boardrooms, concentration carved by necessity. The sight punctured his composure. He felt the first wave of irritation, reputation, neighbors, order upset, before something heavier broke through. The boy pulled out a container, checked it, and slipped it into a plastic bag with practiced speed. Not play, not mischief. Precision, haste, and shame braided together. The millionaire's thoughts stumbled over themselves, naming excuses that dissolved as quickly as they formed. The child looked up, and for a breath, their eyes met. There was no defiance in that look, only a calculation older than childhood. He returned to the house with a mind that refused to smooth back down. The polished floors reflected his steps, but inside a different kind of echo began, a series of memories he had not filed properly. The maid's shoes, soul-thinning to paper. The way she declined the extra slice of cake at staff celebrations with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The boy's uniform, washed to a pale ghost of its original color. The calendar reminders he ignored about school closures when staff arrived with children in tow because there was nowhere else for them to go. The clues had been there, but comfort has a way of blurring edges that should remain sharp. He started paying attention quietly, the way investors study markets before a downturn. He noticed the maid's hands reddened from bleach. He noticed how she arrived before sunrise to catch 2 buses from a neighborhood his driver never entered. He noticed the notes pinned to the staff board about overtime limits and the silent calculations those limits forced on people whose rent did not respect spreadsheets. He noticed how other staff treated the boy with a careful kindness that held inside it an ache, as if all of them knew a story he had not yet earned. The answer revealed itself slowly, not in confession, but in pattern. The boy was not taking trash. He was choosing among leftovers. He waited for containers from catered lunches and quiet dinners, the kind tossed out still heavy with portions no one would miss. He selected carefully because he had learned that old food can harm as quickly as it can help. He did this not for himself alone, but for a household stretched thin by wages that kept breath in lungs and light in rooms but left hunger pacing the kitchen. The maid had the strength to go without and the stubborn dignity to keep going without saying a word. The realization landed with a weight unfamiliar to a man used to controlling outcomes. He had built a narrative in which individuals are engines and effort is the fuel, a narrative that allowed him to see his wealth as proof of virtue rather than a convergence of advantages, breaks, and labor performed by others. Now he saw labor that wore his address on its name tag, bending over a bin because the arithmetic of survival demanded it. He tried to fix it the way he fixed most things, swiftly, cleanly, invisibly. He drafted a donation, scheduled a meeting with a human resources director, posted a motivational quote about gratitude on a private social feed. None of it touched the marrow of the problem, because the marrow was not a single shortage but a system calibrated to squeeze. He had to step into the discomfort rather than paint it over with charity. He began with questions he should have asked long ago. What did his staff earn compared to the cost of living within a bus ride of his house? How did scheduling policies push parents into impossible equations? Which vendors saved him money by shaving dignity off the people they sent? What happened when complaints were raised in voices that landlords, lenders, and supervisors had been trained not to trust? He started reading, not for headlines, but for histories. He found stories of families who worked full-time and still hovered one unexpected bill away from crisis. And he recognized an ugly symmetry, prosperity that demanded invisibility from those who sustained it. The mansion, once a sealed environment, began to feel porous. He noticed his daughter noticing. Children are observers without the armor of adult rationalization. She left an extra snack on the counter when the boy waited in the corridor, not as pity, but as friendship disguised as normalcy. Her tenderness made his own restraint look smaller than he wanted to admit. He felt shame, not as a performance, but as an engine. He let it move him. Change began with numbers because numbers make the silent audible. He audited wages across his household and businesses against what it actually cost to live within reach of work. He reversed the practice of outsourcing where it served profit by extracting humanity. He designed a benefits package for domestic staff equal to his office employees, health care that wasn't a maze, paid time off that could be used without penalty, predictable schedules that honored the non-negotiable logistics of school pickups and bus timetables. He added a grocery stipend that worked like clockwork, not like charity. He created a fund for emergencies that did not require humiliation to access. The first tests were always social rather than fiscal. People who shared his circles performed encouragement and then whispered about imprudence. They joked about slippery slopes, about precedent, about how generosity attracts dependency. They didn't have to say the quiet part because it was woven into the questions. Who deserves security, and what do we call people when we wish to pay them less than they need to live? He recognized himself in those whispers and chose a different sentence. Within the house, a different resistance appeared. Quieter, but telling. Some staff who had benefited from proximity to power bristled when a new fairness disrupted unofficial hierarchies. Subtle biases surfaced like hairline cracks in a mirror, the belief that certain accents should remain out of sight, that certain hairstyles look unprofessional, that certain neighborhoods imprint people with unreliability. He did not respond with speeches. He responded with standards defined in writing and backed by consequence. Respect was no longer a courtesy. It was a condition of employment. He asked the maid what would actually help, beyond money. She did not speak for others, but she named patterns. Landlords who raised deposits when renters were black, assuming risk where there was only prejudice. School offices that called during work hours and penalized lateness that parents could not control. Grocery stores in her neighborhood with prices that felt like fines. He used his networks where he could to pry windows open rather than pose near them for photographs. He funded transit passes for staff as a benefit, then noticed who was missing from cars in the driveway at shift's end. People who had been expected to make last buses that don't wait for lives. News traveled, as it always does when power moves strangely. Some said he was reinventing himself. Others said he had lost his edge. He was not reinvented. He was interrupted. The interruption looked like a child leaning into a trash bin and finding dinner. Once seen, it refused to leave. The boy changed, though not in a way that made him a story to be told at parties. He changed in the ordinary ways dignity allows, shoulders settling, backpack heavier with library books than with quiet worry, attention freed from math problems and soccer drills instead of inventorying pantries that were too often bare. He found a seat at the kitchen table in the staff lounge during homework hours, rather than an alcove near the bins. He learned that stability feels like breathing without counting bills first. The millionaire's daughter changed too in the expanding arc of her attention. She began to understand that her home was not a sealed world, but an intersection of many lives. Her piano practice sounded different to her, less like achievement and more like gratitude as practice. She learned to ask questions that adults sometimes fear, and he let her see his answers when they were imperfect. The mansion itself did not transform. Marble remained marble, lawns remained trimmed, dinners remained plated. But the air shifted. The house no longer swallowed sound. It carried it. Laughter in the staff corridor stopped sounding apologetic. Breaks were taken because breaks were scheduled, not stolen. The maid moved through rooms with the same precision, but without the tightness that comes from calculating how much of one's life must be erased to make a living. He still stumbled. He caught himself reaching for quick fixes and returned to the slower discipline of repair. He learned to recognize the reflex that wants stories of resilience without the responsibility of removing the conditions that require it. He let go of a few clients whose profits required a blindness he could no longer maintain. It cost him money. It bought him coherence. When he thought about the day behind the garage, he remembered not only the boy, but himself, the version that recoiled more at embarrassment than at hunger. That memory kept him honest. He began quietly funding a program that rerouted surplus food from events to families identified by community organizations, but he refused to call it generosity. It was arithmetic corrected midstream. He invested in apprenticeship pipelines that did not measure potential by polish but by grit and curiosity. He asked his managers to report not just revenue, but retention and well-being metrics, and he tied bonuses to both. The numbers taught their own lesson. When people are treated like assets in the truest sense, companies stop hemorrhaging both talent and trust. He understood, lastly, that the story was not his to center. The maid did not become a symbol. She remained a person with a life that did not need his narration. He shifted his gaze from heroics to habits. Systems are made of daily choices multiplied, and he controlled more of those choices than he had once admitted. The day the boy no longer paused by the bins, the millionaire walked past that spot and let the quiet write its own headline. The absence of desperation is not dramatic. It is a kind of peace that never makes news because it looks like nothing at all happening. It is also the goal. He had been devastated when he learned why the boy was digging in the trash. The devastation had felt like a collapse, but it was a clearing. In the open space that followed, accountability rooted where excuses once grew. He discovered that fortune, like a mirror, tells the truth only when you stand close enough to see yourself in it, and close enough to see who is beside you, reflected in the same frame. If a single glance behind a mansion can undo a lifetime of comfortable myths, what might change if we all chose to look where we've trained ourselves not to? The next time you notice someone reaching into the shadows, will you avert your eyes, or will you lean closer and ask the question that matters most? Why?